the sacred warnings of Padre Pio.
The words were right. The priest was validly ordained. The formula was spoken correctly. The man knelt, he confessed, he received the words of absolution. He stood up, made the sign of the cross, walked out of the confessional, and not one sin was forgiven. I want to stay with that for a moment before I explain it, because if you are a practicing Catholic, if you go to confession regularly, if you take the sacraments seriously, what I just described is not an edge case. It is not a rare theological curiosity. It is something that happens in confessionals across this country every single week, and most of the people it is happening to have no idea. I need to tell you something that has been weighing on me for a long time. I spent 35 years teaching Catholic theology at a high school in northern Kentucky. I taught the sacraments. I taught confession. I walked students through examination of conscience, through the act of contrition, through the whole structure of what happens in that confessional, and I believed I was teaching it correctly. Then, in 2018, I attended a conference given by Father Ripperger on the theology of demonic oppression and the sacraments, and something I heard there, combined with what I had been reading in Padre Pio's letters and in the documented accounts of his confessional practice, stopped me cold. There is a condition on absolution that most Catholics have never been told about clearly. A condition that the priest cannot verify. A condition that, when absent, renders the entire sacrament null, regardless of the words spoken, regardless of the priest's intention, regardless of how many times you have gone. I'm going to explain exactly what that condition is, and more importantly, I'm going to explain how to make sure it is actually present the next time you go. Before I get into the evidence, and there is substantial evidence, I want to mention something I put together that goes alongside this video. I spent a long time gathering everything I know from theology, from Padre Pio's practice, from conversations with priests about what makes a confession actually valid rather than merely performed. I organized it into a guide called The Perfect Confession. It is in the description. I want you to have it before this video ends because what I am about to lay out deserves more than a single listen. It deserves something you can work through slowly with a pen in your own time. Now let me show you what Padre Pio saw. Padre Pio spent between 8 and 10 hours a day in the confessional at San Giovanni Rotondo, day after day, for decades. People came from across Europe, from America, from every corner of the world to confess to this man. They waited days, sometimes weeks, for a few minutes in that box, and some of them he sent away without absolution. This is not a minor detail. This is one of the most theologically significant facts of his life, and it is one of the least discussed. Padre Pio refused absolution, not to lapsed Catholics, not to people who had abandoned the faith, but to regular penitents, devout Catholics, people who came to him precisely because they wanted to be right with God. There is a documented account of a young woman who came to Padre Pio's confessional multiple times to confess sins against purity. Each time, he refused to grant absolution, not because the sin was unforgivable, not because she was insincere in coming, but because he could see, with the gift of reading souls that had been documented in his life repeatedly, that she intended, when she left that confessional and returned to her ordinary life, to fall into the same sin again. She came a second time. He refused. A third time. He refused. A fourth time. He refused. On the fifth occasion, something changed inside her. Not on the surface, something deeper. She arrived at a point, and the account describes it with precision, where she thought clearly, "I would rather die than commit this sin again." That was not a dramatic expression. That was an act of the will. Padre Pio examined her closely. He gave absolution. This is documented in C. Bernard Ruffin's biography, Padre Pio, The True Story, which is among the most rigorously researched accounts of his life available. 4 refusals, not because the priest was harsh, because the sacrament requires something that was not yet present, and Padre Pio could see its absence with a clarity that no ordinary priest possesses. Now here is where it gets uncomfortable. What Padre Pio could see, your confessor cannot. Your parish priest is a holy man. He is administering a valid sacrament. He speaks the formula. He extends absolution. He does everything the Church requires of him, but he cannot read your soul. He cannot verify the interior disposition that makes the sacrament real rather than merely performed, which means the burden, the entire weight of whether this sacrament actually happens, rests on something happening inside you, something the priest has no way to assess, something that, if absent, the formula does not supply. There is a second account from Padre Pio's confessional that I find even more unsettling than the first. An Englishwoman traveled to San Giovanni Rotondo to confess to Padre Pio. She had heard of his holiness, his gifts. She came with what she believed was sincere desire for the sacrament. He shut the confessional door in her face. She came back the next day. He shut the door again. This continued for 20 consecutive days. 20. On the 21st day, Padre Pio finally spoke to her. He called her, in the account that has been preserved, a poor blind creature. And he said, and I want you to hear this carefully, he said, ask yourself how divine compassion could receive you after years of sacrilege. Years of sacrilege. This woman was not a fallen-away Catholic. She was not someone who had abandoned the practice of the faith. She had been going to confession and to communion for years. Her confessor had no idea what was happening. She herself had no idea what was happening. She was not in bad faith in the sense of deliberately deceiving anyone. She simply had not understood, and perhaps no one had explained it to her clearly, that the interior condition she was bringing to that confessional was not meeting the threshold the sacrament requires, and what Padre Pio called the result of that, repeated years-long well-intentioned but theologically insufficient sacramental reception, was sacrilege. That is a severe word. I am not using it to frighten anyone. I am using it because it is the word Padre Pio used, and I think we owe it to him and to ourselves to understand what he meant. Let me explain what the Church actually teaches about this, because I think it is taught less clearly than it should be. The Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 1451, states this directly. Among the penitence acts, contrition occupies the first place. Contrition is sorrow of the soul and detestation for the sin committed, together with the resolution not to sin again. The resolution not to sin again. This is not optional language. This is not an aspirational add-on to the sacrament. The Catechism calls it part of what contrition is. Without it, there is no contrition. And without contrition, there is no valid sacrament of penance. Now, the Catechism also makes a distinction that is important here. Paragraph 1453 addresses what is called imperfect contrition or attrition. Contrition motivated not by love of God, but by fear of punishment, fear of hell. This is sufficient for the sacrament, the Church teaches, as long as it is genuine. The key word is genuine, not performed, not felt as a vague emotional discomfort, not the relief of having gone through the ritual, genuinely present as an act of the will. I am sorry for this, and I intend to change. What Padre Pio was seeing, in confession after confession, was something different from genuine attrition. He was seeing people who had the feeling of confessing without the act of will that the feeling is supposed to accompany. The emotional experience of the sacrament, without the interior motion the sacrament requires. There is a specific error at the center of this, and it is one that Father Ripperger has identified and explained with precision. A person confesses a mortal sin. Let us say it is a habitual sin, something they have been confessing for months or years. They confess the sin, but they do not confess. And more critically, they do not genuinely intend to avoid what moral theology calls the near occasion of sin. The specific circumstance, relationship, habit, or situation that makes the sin not just possible, but nearly inevitable. Classical moral theology, going back to St. Alphonsus Liguori, holds that a firm purpose of amendment requires not only resolution to avoid the sin itself, but also resolution to avoid its proximate occasion. If the occasion is not addressed, the resolution is not firm. Because a resolution to avoid a sin while leaving every condition for its repetition intact is not a resolution at all. It is a wish. Let me make this concrete. A person confesses adultery. They are genuinely distressed by it. They feel the weight of the sin. They say the words of contrition, but they have not ended the relationship. They have no intention of ending the relationship. They are hoping, perhaps, that the grace of the sacrament will give them strength they have not yet committed to seeking. The confessor absolves. The words are spoken. And the sacrament did not happen, because the firm purpose of amendment was absent. The near occasion was not addressed. The will did not move. A person confesses habitual use of pornography. They are ashamed. They want to be free of it. They confess it week after week. But the devices are unrestricted. The access is open. Nothing in their external life reflects a genuine resolution to make the sin difficult rather than easy. The confessor absolves, the words are spoken, and the mechanism ran. The interior event did not occur. Father Ripperger's analysis goes further than this. He teaches that habitual mortal sin, persisted in through repeated invalid confessions, creates a specific spiritual architecture. The enemy does not lose the ground he holds simply because words of absolution were spoken. He retains it because the act of will that would have genuinely revoked his claim was never made. The person walked away with the verbal formula of forgiveness and carried the full unresolved weight of the sin into communion, not accumulating grace, accumulating sacrilege. And there is something Padre Pio himself said about this that I have turned over in my mind for years. He said, if you go to confess to another priest just to gain absolution, you will go to hell together with him. I want to be careful about how I present this. Padre Pio was not condemning people who seek a second opinion in confession. He was not attacking the practice of confessing to different priests. He was describing a specific interior disposition. The disposition of a person who approaches the sacrament not to genuinely convert, but to obtain the verbal output of the mechanism, the words of absolution, without the interior event those words presuppose. He called that path to hell, not as condemnation, as structural truth, as what happens when a soul treats the sacrament of mercy as a transaction rather than a transformation. I taught theology for 35 years. I thought I understood the sacrament of penance. In the summer of 2012, a woman in her late 60s approached me after a parish mission at our church in Covington. Her name was Agnes Whitmore. She was a widow. She was a daily communicant. She led the parish Rosary Guild. She was, by every external measure, one of the most faithful Catholics in our community. The visiting Franciscan priest who had given the mission had spoken that evening about the requirements for a valid confession, specifically about firm purpose of amendment and the near occasion of sin. He had been direct, but not harsh. It was a careful, charitable treatment of a difficult subject. Agnes found me in the vestibule afterward. She was not distressed in the way I might have expected. She was quietly shaken. The way a person is shaken when machinery they have trusted for decades turns out to have been running empty. Raymond, she said, I have been going to confession every week for 31 years, and I think I have been confessing the same thing the entire time, and I think I knew when I said it, that I was going to do it again. The sin was not dramatic. It was habitual gossip about a particular family in the parish, shared every week in a phone call with a close friend. She had confessed it hundreds of times over 31 years. She had received absolution hundreds of times. She had never once ended the phone call. She had never once genuinely resolved to stop. She looked at me and said, "Does that mean none of it counted?" I sat with that question for a moment. I did not rush to reassure her. I did not give her a homily. Then I said, "Agnes, I don't know what happened in the confessional between you and God across 30 years. That is between you and Him. But I do know what the sacrament requires, and I think you already know the answer to your question. That's why you're standing here." She went to confession that evening with the visiting priest. For the first time in 3 decades, she named not just the sin, but the near occasion. The phone call, the friend, the family. She asked for help making a genuine resolution rather than just confessing the action. She cried during the absolution. She told me afterward, "I felt it this time. I actually felt it." She stopped the weekly phone call. 6 months later, she found me again after Mass. She said, "I think for 30 years I was confessing to feel better. This time, I confessed to actually change." I am not sharing Agnes's story to make anyone feel condemned. I'm sharing it because she sat with the honest question, does this count? Instead of deflecting it. And that honesty opened a door that 31 years of weekly confession had not opened. That willingness to actually look is the beginning of everything. Now let me address something that may be rising in you right now. Perhaps you are sitting with a version of Agnes's question. Perhaps you are thinking about a sin you have confessed many times. Perhaps you are asking yourself quietly whether the resolution you brought to those confessions was genuine, or whether it was the hope that the words would do the work your will was not yet prepared to do. I want to say something clearly. The answer to that question is not condemnation. Padre Pio refused absolution to the young woman 4 times. But he did not send her away damned. He sent her away unsacramentalized, which is a different thing entirely. He was giving her time. He was giving her space to arrive at a genuine interior act. He understood that the sacrament, administered when the interior condition is absent, does not help the penitent. And refusing it, when offered with charity and explanation, creates the possibility of the real thing. His refusals were acts of mercy, not severity. Mercy. Canon 960 of the Code of Canon Law addresses something related to this. It requires that all mortal sins be confessed by species and number. Deliberate omission of a mortal sin invalidates the entire confession, not just the omitted sin, but all of it. The sacrament is not a formula that overrides the interior state of the penitent. It is a meeting between the soul and divine mercy that requires the soul to actually show up, not just appear. Stay with me here, because this is where it matters. The population most at risk for what I have been describing is not the lapsed Catholic. It is not the person who stopped going to Mass. It is not the person who has walked away from the faith. It is the faithful Catholic, the weekly communicant, the person in the pew, the person who goes to confession regularly, who takes the sacrament seriously, who would be mortified to think of themselves as approaching the sacrament unworthily. Pew Research data from 2018 found that only 31% of weekly Mass-attending Catholics believe in the real presence. A Knights of Columbus and Marist poll from 2022 found that only 24% of self-identified Catholics go to confession at least annually. Those 24%, the most devout, the most committed, the ones who take the sacraments most seriously, are also the population most vulnerable to the error Padre Pio spent his entire confessional ministry trying to correct. Not because they are bad Catholics, because they are serious ones who have never been told precisely what the sacrament requires of them on the interior. There is a word canon lawyers use that most practicing Catholics have never needed to know in relation to their own sacramental life. Invalid. Not the confession of someone who hasn't been to Mass in 20 years, the confession of someone who was there every week and didn't realize what they were walking away without. I want to be honest about something. I spent more than 3 decades teaching this sacrament, and it was not until I sat with Padre Pio's documented practice, not the sanitized hagiography, but the actual accounts of what happened in that confessional box, that I understood the full weight of what the Church teaches here. He spent 10 hours a day in that confessional. He could see what we cannot. And what he saw in the souls of devout regular penitents, people who looked like model Catholics from the outside, shook him to his core. He did not respond to that with gentleness that looked away. He responded with a mercy fierce enough to refuse them something they thought they were receiving, because he knew the real thing was possible, and he wanted it for them more than they wanted the comfort of the formula. That is the question I want to leave with you before I move into what you can actually do tonight. Are you receiving the sacrament? Or are you receiving the formula? Are the words landing on an interior disposition that the sacrament requires? Or are they landing on a relief response, the emotional experience of having gone through the ritual that feels like the sacrament but is not? Ask yourself honestly. You do not have to answer to me. You have to answer to yourself and to him. The guide I mentioned at the beginning, the perfect confession, I want to bring it up again here because what I am about to walk you through is connected to it. Every question in that guide is designed to surface exactly what we have been talking about. Not as a reading exercise, as a mirror. Walk through it tonight if you can. It is in the description. It takes about 20 minutes, and it will tell you more about your interior disposition than 10 years of routine confession has. Now here is what I want you to actually do. 3 steps, not complicated, but requiring honesty. Step 1. The purpose audit. Tonight, 15 minutes, with a piece of paper. Write down the sin you confess most consistently, the one that appears most reliably in your examination of conscience, the one you have confessed multiple times. Underneath it, write this question and answer it in writing. If I confess this tonight and wake up tomorrow in the same circumstances, the same relationship, the same phone, the same situation, the same environment, have I genuinely resolved to avoid it? Or am I hoping the words will do the work my will has not yet done? Write the answer. Do not judge it. Do not edit it toward the answer you think you should have. Just look at it. What you see on that paper is the starting point for a genuine confession, not what you confess, what you actually intend to do about it. If you look at what you wrote and realize the resolution has not been real, that is not a catastrophe. That is the beginning of an honest conversation with God about what is actually there and what you actually need. Step 2. The firm purpose prayer. Kneel down. Say this aloud. Lord, I cannot manufacture what is not there. I cannot will myself into a disposition I don't have. But I ask you, give me the grace to want to change, not just the relief of absolution. Show me what I am still protecting. Illuminate the near occasion I have been unwilling to name. I hand you what I cannot fix in myself. Make it real. That prayer matters because it is honest about the actual condition. A prayer that pretends to a resolve that isn't there accomplishes nothing. A prayer that names the absence and asks God to fill it. That is a different kind of prayer entirely. That is the prayer of the young woman on her 5th visit to Padre Pio's confessional. She stopped pretending she had the resolve. She asked for it, and it came. Step 3. Confession with full disclosure. Bring the piece of paper from the purpose audit to the confessional. Not to read from it, to remember what you actually found there. Name the near occasion specifically, not just the sin, the circumstance that makes the sin almost inevitable. Say to the priest, Father, I am confessing this sin, and I want you to know that the near occasion is this specific circumstance. I am asking for your help in making a firm resolution. Ask the priest to assess your disposition if you are uncertain of it. Ask him directly, do you think I have the interior condition this sacrament requires? That single act of transparency, naming the near occasion, asking for help with the resolution, inviting the priest's assessment, changes the entire architecture of the confession. It moves the confession from a ritual performance to an actual encounter. It gives the priest something to work with that he rarely gets to see, and it gives you the possibility of something Agnes Whitmore waited 31 years to experience. The sacrament that actually happens. Remember what I told you at the beginning. The words were right. The priest was valid, the formula was spoken, the man walked out lighter, and not one sin was forgiven. That is not a horror story. That is an invitation. An invitation to go back to that confessional, not to perform the ritual one more time, but to bring the thing that makes the ritual real. Padre Pio spent 10 hours a day in that confessional. He refused absolution not because he was cruel, not because he wanted people to leave without mercy. He refused it because he understood what the sacrament actually requires. He could see when it was present and when it was absent, and he wanted the real thing for the souls who came to him, not the formula, the real thing. Tonight, so do I. The next time you go to confession, bring your honest answer to the question on that piece of paper, not the answer you wish were there. The answer that is actually there. God already knows it. The sacrament is simply the place where you bring it to him and ask him to do something about it. That is what Padre Pio was waiting for, every day, for decades. Take this with you tonight.